Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When hospitals are struggling to provide essential care, why is the Prime Minister's government cutting the number of beds in our National Health Service?
Prime Minister.
Thanks to the medical advances, to the use of technology, to the quality of care, what we see in hospital stays is actually that the average length of time for staying in hospital has virtually halved since the year 2000. But let's actually look at Labour's record on this issue. In the last 6 years of the last Labour government, 25,000 hospital beds were cut. But we don't even need to go as far back as that. Let's just look at what was Labour's policy before the last election. Because before the last election, the Right Honourable Member for Lee, a former Labour Shadow Health Secretary, said the following: "What I'd cut are hospital beds." Labour policy cut hospital beds.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, in 2010, there was the highest ever level of satisfaction with the National Health Service delivered by a Labour government. The British Medical Association tells us, Mr. Speaker, the British Medical Association, its doctors, that 15,000 beds have been cut in the last 6 years, the equivalent of 24 hospitals, and as a result, we have longer waiting times at A&E, record delayed charges and more people on waiting lists. The Prime Minister claims the NHS is getting the money it needs, so why is it that 1 in 6 of A&E units in England are set for closure or downgrading?
Prime Minister.
Right Honourable Gentleman, what is happening and what has happened since 2010 in A&E. We see 1,500 more emergency care doctors. That includes 600 more A&E consultants. We've got 2,400 more paramedics. We have more people being seen in accident and emergency every single week under this government. He talks about what the NHS needs. What the NHS needs is more doctors. We're giving it more doctors. What it needs is more funding. We're giving it more funding. What it does not need is a bankrupt economy, which is exactly what Labour would give it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the Prime Minister why 1 in 6 A&E units are currently set for closure or downgrading. She didn't answer. One of the problems, and she well knows this, is the £4.6 billion cut to social care, which has a knock-on effect. And her friend, the Tory chair of the Local Government Association, Lord Porter, has said, and I quote, "Extra council tax income will not bring in anywhere near enough money to alleviate the growing pressure on social care." 2 weeks ago, we found out about the sweetheart deal with Tory Surrey. When will the other 151 social services departments in England get the same as the Surrey deal?
Prime Minister.
The Right Honourable Gentleman refers to the questions he asked me about Surrey County Council 2 weeks ago. Those claims were utterly destroyed the same afternoon. So rather than asking the same question, he should stand up and apologise.
Mr. Speaker, far from apologising, it's the Prime Minister who ought to be reading her correspondence and answering the letter from 62 council leaders representing social services authorities who want to know if they're going to get the same deal as Surrey as they are grappling with a crisis which has left over 1 million people not getting the social care they need. Mr. Speaker, we opposed the Tory cuts in the NHS, which involved scrapping of nurses' bursaries because we feared it would discourage people from entering training. Her government said removing funding for nurses' bursaries would create an extra 10,000 training places in this Parliament. Has this target been met?
Prime Minister.
There are 10,000 more training places available for nurses in the NHS. But the Right Honourable Gentleman talks about the amount of money that is being spent on the National Health Service. It is this Conservative government that is putting the extra funding into the NHS. And I remind the Right Honourable Gentleman that we are spending £1.3 billion more on the NHS this year than Labour planned to do if they'd won the election.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, my questions were about the social services funding to pay for social care. No answer. My questions were about the number of nurse training places that are being brought in. No answer. In reality, 10,000 fewer places have been filled because there are fewer applications. There is a problem being built up for the future. And in addition to that, the Royal College of Midwives estimates there's a shortage of 3,500 midwives in England, and the Royal College of Nursing warned the nursing workforce is in crisis. And if fewer nurses graduate in 2020, it will exacerbate what is already an unsustainable situation. Will the Prime Minister at least commit herself to reinstating the nurses' bursary?
Minister.
The Right Honourable Gentleman asked me a question about nursing training places, which I answered. I have to say to him, if he doesn't like the answer he gets, he can't just carry on asking the same question if I've answered it previously. He's talking about all these issues in relation to what is happening in the NHS. Let's just look at what is happening in the NHS. We have 1,800 more midwives in the NHS since 2010. We have more people being seen in accident and emergency since 2010. We have more operations taking place every week in the National Health Service. Our National Health Service staff are working hard. They're providing a quality of care for patients up and down the country. What they don't need is a Labour Party policy that leads to a bankrupt economy, because Labour's policy is you spend money on everything, which means you bankrupt the economy, have no money to spend on anything. That doesn't help doctors and nurses, it doesn't help patients, it doesn't help the NHS, and it doesn't help ordinary working families up and down this country.
Mr. Speaker, yes, let's look at the National Health Service. Let's thank all those that work so hard in our National Health Service, but recognise the pressures they are under. Today, the Marie Curie Foundation Trust finds that nurses are so overstretched they cannot provide the high-quality care needed for patients at the very end of their lives. The lack of care in community prevents people the dignity of dying at home. There is a nursing shortage. Something should be done about it, such as reinstating the nurses' bursary. Mr. Speaker, her government has put the NHS and social care in a state of emergency. 9 out of 10 NHS trusts are unsafe. 18,000 patients a week are waiting. Mr. Speaker, I repeat the figure. 18,000 patients a week are waiting on trolleys in hospital corridors. 1.2 million, often very dependent. Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that some members don't want to be concerned about the fact that there are 1.2 million elderly people not getting the care that they need. The legacy of her government will be blighting our NHS for decades. Fewer hospitals, fewer A&E departments, fewer nurses and fewer people getting the care they need. We need a government that puts the NHS first and will invest in our NHS.
First of all, I have to say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that he should consider correcting the record, because 54% of hospital trusts are considered good or outstanding, quite different from the figure that he has shown. Secondly, I will take no lessons on the NHS from the party. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party says we should take lessons from the NHS. I won't take any lessons from the party that presided over Mid-Staff's Hospital and the day when it happened in Mid-Staff's Hospital. They say we should learn lessons. I'll tell you who should learn lessons. It's the Labour Party who still fail to recognise if you're going to fund the NHS, and we are putting more money in, there are more doctors, more operations, more nurses. If you're going to fund the NHS, you need a strong economy. But now we know Labour have a different sort of phrase now for their approach to these things. Remember, Labour used to talk about boom and bust? Now it's no longer boom and bust, it's borrow and bankrupt.